Hi everyone, my name is Darryl Panes, CEO of As Good As Gold Australia, and this evening once again I'm joined by my brother Brian, a partner at As Good As Gold.
Good evening, Darryl.
And tonight we have a very special returning guest. He is the founder and general manager of Matterhorn Asset Management and Gold Switzerland. He is an icon in the precious metal space. I speak of none other, of course, than the one, the only, the incomparable Egon von Greyerz. Good evening, Egon.
Brian, Darryl, good to see you, and thank you for those kind words. Too kind, probably.
And good morning, Egon.
Always great to speak to you.
Yes, it's been a long while, and we were just a few months.
Well, it's been 9 months.
9 months. I can't believe that since we've spoken with Egon, of course, since.
Oh yeah.
But so far as an interview is concerned, yeah, it's incredible how time gets away. We're only saying a year is almost past in Christmas, almost upon us.
And in between, we've had another birthday, so you got maybe 1 year older. So more experience, but less time to use it.
A lot of water flowing under the bridge since we spoke last. And you've obviously taken that into account, Egon, when you presented a publication just recently on King World News. And I read it, and I just thought we need to get a little bit more from this, and ask Egon if he could share some of his comments there with what he said on King World.
Yeah.
And you were warning that the death of the global financial system is now at hand. And I looked at the title and I thought, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, things are getting very serious out there now. And I want to quote a couple of, or make a couple of comments, provide a couple of quotes that Egon stated, word for word. And Egon said, "The world is now witnessing the end of a currency and financial system which the Chinese already forecast in 1971. I'd like to know a little bit more about that as well. After Nixon closed the gold window. Again, remember von Mises' words. There is no means of avoiding the final collapse of a boom brought about by credit expansion. History tells us that we have now reached the point of no return. So denying history at this point will not just be very costly, but will lead to a total destruction of investors' wealth." Scary. So, Egon, you paint a very gloomy picture. So my question to you is this: where to from here? What's next?
Well, as you know, I'm pretty boring from the point of view that I haven't changed my mind in the last 25 years. So people will hear more or less the same words from me with variations on a theme, of course. We all thought that there was a risk that the system would collapse around the great financial crisis, 2006 to 9, especially 2008. But by a miracle, it survived. And this is, when you reach the end of an era or a system, when we see it, and I saw the risk very early, and that's why we went into gold at the beginning of this century, when gold was about $300 or just under. But things don't happen exactly when you see them, because a process of this magnitude and length takes some time to evolve and come to an end. But but I think that's where we are now. It's taken, sure, that this cycle has lasted. We can take the Fed creation in 1913 as the beginning, and then of course the event that you quoted now from my latest article, the 71, 15th of August, closing of the gold window. And that was really the final death nail into the system when things started to accelerate. But here we are. I remember that. I mean, I had already started my working life, since I've had a long life. I remember it well, but it's, we've seen the most massive and incredible amount of debt and money creations since that gold window was closed. But I think now, all of a sudden, especially in this century, it has started to accelerate. And there was, I referred to another article in this latest article where I explained the exponential phase of any development, whether it's debt creation or population growth or implosion, for that matter. I explained that a stadium being filled with water, one drop at the time, and first one drop, and then it doubles every minute, then 2, then 4, then 8, etc. And you ask, how long does it take to fill the stadium? It can be a swimming pool also, but saying so. People think it was maybe months or whatever, but it takes 50 minutes to fill the whole stadium by just 1 drop, 2 drops, and doubling every minute. And then people are, well, how full is the stadium at 45 minutes of the 50? Well, it's only 7% full. And that's so, which means, is that last 5 minutes goes from 7% to 100%. And this is what we're seeing now. This is what we're seeing in money creation, in money printing. This just exploded. The U.S. debt to GDP was in 2000. It was around 50%, and now it's over 130. The Banana Republic level, and I think we're looking now at U.S. deficits, and the whole world is the same. China is suffering, Europe is suffering. It's same everywhere. And we're looking at now what's likely to happen in the next few years with massive deficits. There's zero will to cut down on expenses. That doesn't exist politically. That kind of measure. Nobody dares to cut down on the people's benefits and the ridiculous spending that all governments now have. So therefore, we're going to see more money printing, and we take U.S. as the biggest economy in the world. Therefore, we always use that as a measuring stick. And you're seeing 2 trillion deficit in the financial year that just passed, and the coming year is going to be at least 2 trillion, and that's without any bad news like more banking collapses or more riots, wars, etc. So that's why I think we are now getting into the final stage, and that's why we're going to see an acceleration now. And I don't think there are that many years before this what I call collapse takes place, and that's going to be very vicious for all of us. That absolutely, without doubt.
Really gets. I was watching Joe Biden interviewed the other day. It was only a very short interview. It was just a piece of the interview, but the gentleman who was interviewing him said, "Joe, we're fighting 2 wars at the moment. Do you think that we've overextended ourselves? Do you think America can afford this commitment, financial commitment?" And Joe Biden looked at him and said, and he looked astonished that he'd been asked the question. He said, "My dear man, you're talking about the United States of America. Nothing is too big for us." And I thought, is that arrogance? I mean, the ultimate level of arrogance. And I thought, so is it just arrogance that's causing them to continue to spend at this level, or is it that they're just not smart enough? What is it, or they just don't understand, or is it all of those things? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Well, it's hard to believe that they don't understand, and it's hard to believe that the advisors, whoever they are, because Biden has no thoughts of his own at this point, sadly. He's being totally directed by a team behind him, and that's a wonderful way to run a country, because you can put any words into the mouth of the leader. I mean, I'm not criticizing Biden. We all reach a point when we are too old, and me, I'm getting closer also. Hopefully my wife or my team in business will tell me that's it, we'll turn off the camera.
Not yet, Egon, not yet.
Nobody's said anything yet, but it might be closer than I think. But that's sad. And at least the last person, or the first who should say it, is your wife, if you have a wife, of course. But so Biden is not running the country, as we all know, and he has a team, a power-hungry team behind him, of many neoconservatives that are directing the policy. And they don't give a damn about this debt. They will, just because they know that they can't do anything else. There is no other solution, as von Mises said. It's the only solution short term is to print more money, and the only outcome without fail throughout history is a collapse of the system. And they must know that, but every leader and every of a country, or every central bank head, all they hope to do is just leave, pass the baton to the next one, and leave without having failed. And of course, as we know, all of these figures in history, nobody will remember them afterwards anyway. And so and we, again, if we look at history, there is no economy or based on fiat money that has ever survived in history. We know the Romans, for example, between 170 and 280, the denarius went from 100% silver content to 0% silver content. So that was that was the way of debasing currencies in those days, just taking out the precious metal and just filling it with zinc or copper, whatever. And so, if any leader studies history, he knows that'll be the case. But I sadly, when you're desperate and you only have one solution, which is to print money, and it's worked. It's worked for 50 years or more in this monetary era. So they hope that it's going to work for another few years until somebody else takes over and can be blamed. It's as simple as that. They're buying votes because there is no way whatsoever that any leader in the Western world is going to cut down expenses on expenses. It's just, they know that they'll be voted out straight away. So we will see. This they know about it, but they have no other solution, and they will do what every leader or every government has done in history. They will destroy the economy through the destruction, through debt and destruction of the money system. But this time it's the whole world. It's not just the U.S. because it's the same in Western Europe. It's the same. Even China is suffering. I think they can deal with it better because they're suffering even now, but they can deal with it better because it's mostly internal. They don't have any external debt. So I think they will come out with better than anybody else, but they will certainly also have a tough time, especially if, world trade is now anyway under pressure with the sanctions. I mean, sanctions are the most ludicrous measure ever for the prosperity of the world economy. They don't work, number one. Number two, if you take the Roman Empire, which prospered for hundreds of years, and during that time, I mean, the countries were warring continuously, but there was never any sanction. There was free trade across the whole of the empire and outside the into the empire and out of the empire. And that's what made it prosperous. But now to sanction, the trade in the world is the worst thing that can happen. So that will precipitate the fall, of course. Yeah. So I'm just my, as you know, way of looking at the world and the world economy is to look at risk. And I think risk is unprecedented. I think we're getting into final stage. I think the consequences will be dire, as they always are when a monetary system collapses and a debt system collapses. And because it's not just that everybody will have horrible times financially, but also we will have a lot of social unrest. Wars will continue. I don't think any of these wars will stop quickly. We now have the start of again another war, Arab world against the West, against America, basically. And of course the Arab world is backed by Russia also, and probably China. So we will have geopolitical conflicts, and we will have, sadly, a lot of internal strife in countries. We're seeing now social unrest starting, with and of course the migration problem in many parts of the world, America, Europe, etc., will also mean that the rise of, which we're seeing already, of right-wing elements, or they're not really political, they're really more hooligans, which will, but we will see Nazi parties coming up and fighting against the immigrants. Because that, and especially if times become a bit more difficult, because the immigrants will be blamed, and of course, Western Europe, like America, is taking on a lot more immigrants that they can cope with, and that's where we'll see these people who are poor and they find it difficult to make ends meet, and therefore we get a lot of crime now also, and that will increase. So I mean, as I said, I don't like to be pessimistic, but this is what I see, and we should just be prepared for it. At the same time, I always say, we've got to look after ourselves and our families and enjoy life on a daily basis. But it's going to be a very tough time, and nobody, if you and we read the press, etc. Of course, nobody talks about this because nobody expects it, and nobody dares to publish it anyway.
No.
So that's as I said, I'm pretty boring because I've been saying that this to be the outcome, and it's taken long, but anyway, it's on its way, and it's definitely accelerating now.
Yeah. Well, I know that we've talked about debt to GDP. 90% debt to GDP would indicate at that level it's just not possible to pay back the debt, the interest on the debt.
Correct.
And yet America at the moment sitting at about 130% debt to GDP. You've got Japan sitting at nearly double that. And you think, yes, you can get away with it until you can't, which is exactly what Egon has just said. And it may have taken, it's taken longer than we anticipated, but eventually, and this leads, of course, to a lack of confidence within many countries, in focusing on the United States of America. And BRICS, of course, is a typical example of that. And I'd like your comments on BRICS, Egon, because, I mean, they started with 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, which was significant. But now they've got 11 countries. We're talking including Saudi Arabia. So they've now got United Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Russia. I mean, the biggest producers of oil in the world. And they've already indicated what their plan is to provide BRICS nations oil, and they'll accept payment in BRICS currencies and or gold. So this is going to take the emphasis very much away from the US dollar. I mean, basically these countries have turned their back on the US dollar. We know that. But now there's another 30 countries ready to join. So you'd be looking at probably within 12 months, 41 countries in BRICS, totaling something like 80% of the world's GDP. So the American dollar surely couldn't survive in that anyway. Your thoughts?
No, again, as in this latest article, I showed, like I've done many times, that the dollar and all the currencies, as we know, from 1971 have declined 97 to 99% in real terms, and we measure real terms in gold because the only money that's maintained is purchasing power. So of course the dollar will collapse, but the colleague of mine with somebody well known, also Brent Johnson, who has this dollar milkshake theory about the dollar going up first because there's such a high demand for the dollar, basically, and everybody and I'm arguing that it doesn't matter if the dollar, or measured in the dollar index, you measure the dollar against 6 other currencies, which are all worthless from the point of view that they've all declined almost just under 100% in the last 50 years. So there's no first prize for coming first to the bottom. And so it doesn't really matter if the dollar falls first, or if the euro or the yen falls first to the bottom, because they're all going to do it, and they all can't do it at the same time. So it'll take turns. So the argument shouldn't really be about the dollar. It should be about the collapse of the currencies in real terms, and we know that's inevitable. And as I said, that is now going to accelerate, and this is why gold, that we both understand well as a protection against what's happening in the world. Gold is now starting the next phase of acceleration. Fortunately, it doesn't just happen massively in a brief period of time, but it is going to be a gradual strengthening of gold and the other precious metals now in the next few years. It's not going to save the world, but at least the ones who hold gold will save themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is very clear that the dollar against, and of course these BRIC currencies. I mean, I never thought that there would be a gold-backed BRIC currency. This year, for example, everybody talked about. I mean, that was just too optimistic. We know how difficult it is to put together an artificial currency, and if they are clever, which they are, I don't think they are going to have a gold-backed currency. You can't have one currency for 40 nations. It's impossible. It's much better that they all have a sound monetary system, and that they all have a lot of gold in reserves. I'm of the firm opinion that what we're seeing now with the central banks in the East and South, not the Western ones, are increasing their gold holdings because they understand what's happening, and they understand that that's the best way of protecting their own monetary situation. The West has not, Western central banks have not increased gold at all, gold holdings, because they prefer to print money. But they don't, sadly.
Well, it doesn't cost anything, does it, Egon?
Of course, it beats working also. I mean, a few years ago, I wrote an article, why don't we all stop working and just print money, as Biden or Yellen say. Basically, they think America can just cope with anything, as you just said yourself. And therefore, the only way to achieve that for them is to print more money. And therefore, we can all stop working and just live on printed money, see how long it works.
Sure.
But what more importantly, the central banks, after especially the sanctioning of now Russia and confiscation of their reserves held outside of Russia in various banks and central banks, etc. I mean, that has obviously been a big alert for central banks around the world not to hold dollars. You can't have your reserves in the currency or in a country that is controlled by the US, and the whole Western banking system is controlled by the US, sadly. And therefore, nobody's now going to hold their reserves in dollars, of course. And what central banks will do, in my view, is that we're going to see a gradual shift from holding dollars as your reserve asset to holding gold.
Oh, yeah.
And that will mean that there'll be a gradual switch from dollars. It's not going to happen overnight, and I hope it's not going to be fixed at any parity or anything, because that's the worst. It's much better that you have a free floating gold, free gold, and that gradually you see the central banks buying more and more gold. And of course, if they're going to replace the dollar reserves, central bank reserves, by gold, there is no chance of finding gold in sufficient quantities at this price. So you will see a major revaluation of gold, probably by multiples over a number of years, because that's the only way for central banks to fill their coffers with gold rather than worthless dollars. So I think that's a very likely development. We're seeing it, as we said already, in the East and the South. The BRIC central banks, etc. They're all increasing their gold holdings, and I think that will accelerate.
Yeah.
But as we all know, all three know, that there's not more gold around. The world cannot produce much more than a bit over 3,000 tons a year, plus a bit of scrap. And there are no major gold finds in the world, haven't been for 25 years. And therefore, we can't satisfy through more production of gold. Only buyers at higher prices. So they'll have to pay up for the gold to get, if they want to put a billion or 100 billion or a few trillion into gold, they have to, eventually it will be at a price which is 5 times higher, 10 times higher. I don't know what. I'm not forecasting. I'm just saying that the demand will obviously make the price go up.
Tell me, you mentioned that this was really of interest to me. It didn't surprise me at all, but I was still very interested in your comment when you made reference to the fact that way back in 1971, when Nixon took America off the gold standard, the Chinese saw it coming then. They knew what was going to happen. And you made a few references to this to back up your comments. Could you please just share that with our audience?
Yes. Well, so this was the official paper for the Chinese government.
Yeah.
And where they, which is so interesting, they declared basically that this is the end of the monetary system, and the dollar as its prop or leader, and we're going to see a decline of the whole Western financial system. I mean, they made that statement so clearly, and you or I could have made it, but they made this 50 years ago, before that had even gone up. I mean, they saw what was coming, and I think that is, in the West we have no statesman whatsoever as leaders today.
No, that's great.
Sadly, the people get what they deserve. And right now we have, bad times when it comes to morals and values, etc. And we get bad leaders, and bad leaders take bad decisions. And nobody, the Chinese can afford to tell the truth because they don't have a democratic system, or they're not elected. And sometimes that is an advantage, because you could clearly run an economy in a much more responsible way if the leaders are that way inclined, because they don't need to please the people on a daily basis to buy votes. The Chinese could never have fed a population of what now 1.3 billion, and everyone is, from what I understand, or has been, well fed in China. And that could never have happened in a Western system. You had so many poor people. So sadly, sometimes these centralized states, they work better to improve the standard of the whole population. Now, of course, they're becoming more westernized, and that will lead to its own problems, but still very much centrally controlled. But this is sometimes, we always talk about, or I do, certainly many of us, that a benevolent dictator is really the best way to run a country. But sadly, benevolent dictators, all of a sudden become too powerful and forget about their benevolence.
Yes. Very
and so therefore it only works for shorter periods.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, China, but the West has no statesman, not a single one. There's not a single leader of any quality whatsoever. I would say, and I'm not an admirer of him and all, but I would say Putin is probably one of the more consistent leaders. Okay, we don't like their values, but at least that Russia, in spite of the enormous pressures that the country is under, the economy is held together because of strong leadership, whether we like it or not. But that's a fact.
Very
well. They lack leadership skills and business skills. I mean, very few of them have significant business backgrounds. And I mean, we spoke to a group of farmers the other night and said every single one of those people would probably make a better prime minister than the one we've got right now, because they've been in business. They know the difference between profit and loss. They know what a surplus is and they know what a deficit is. These guys have got no idea, have they?
No, that's very, very, very true. They're just so much more practical people. Yeah.
But the problem is, power corrupts, of course, and when you become a leader, if you're not a dictator in a communist country, then you in the end you just end up buying votes instead.
Yes.
But this is why the Swiss system is actually the best political system in the world, because there you have people power in the way that government is really doesn't decide much in Switzerland. You have a coalition government of seven cabinet members from various parties, but you have direct democracy in Switzerland. Almost any issue that the country or the people want to change or don't agree with, they just create a list or send out a petition for a referendum, and as long as you get 100,000 signatures, you can hold a referendum on anything you want in Switzerland. And what is the most interesting thing is, and that could be taking part in the war, it can be the price of sugar, it could be anything. Minarets was a very famous example that they actually banned minarets in Switzerland, and that was an initiative from the people. And this was many years ago. But and once that, if that issue that was brought up, if that wins the referendum, it becomes part of the Swiss constitution, which means it cannot be changed by government, cannot be changed by parliament, and it can only be changed by another referendum. And that is real democracy. I mean, the people also become then more responsible. Because, for example, there was the referendum on minimum pay, etc. And the people said no to a high minimum pay because then they understand the consequences when they themselves are actually the ones who decide. And I think therefore the country becomes more responsible when the people is involved in these decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Before we leave this little the information we've been talking about, I only thought about it. It's not even written on my notes here, but the election of the Argentinian leader just recently, supposedly a libertarian. How do you feel Argentina is going to go? How do you feel that the new government? What's it going to be different from the old Argentina? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a bit, of course, and Doug Case has just written about it. He lives partly in Argentina and Uruguay, but as we both know, or all know, the Argentina was one of the strongest economies in the world 100 years ago, with natural resources and well managed. But then came, sadly, governments that destroyed the country totally, government after government. And now, if this is a very positive sign. Is the world ready for it? Well, it seems like it's ready because it's not the only country. You have Holland is the same, in the Netherlands. You have somebody who is anti-immigration, anti-EU, etc., who won the election. But sadly, it's a minority situation because there's not he doesn't have total majority, and he will have problems. Wilders, his name is. He will have problems probably forming a government, and it's the same in Sweden. One of the biggest parties is also Sweden Democrats, and they also after the Social Democrats they're the number two, but nobody wants to rule with them because they're so afraid of they want every government wants to be woke in Europe. They don't. They want to treat everybody so well that it ends up that nobody's treated well, and so we have, and of course in France also a lot of movements, a lot of social unrest. So there are many, and you saw what happened in Ireland. So the movement is. And it's sadly, it's very much a bit of not in Argentina's case, but other countries is very much of an anti-immigration stance. But in Argentina's case, I sincerely hope that Milei can actually do something about it. I mean, this country has been so unstable for such a long time, so he will need quite a long time to change that. But I wish he can, because then it's a wonderful country. From what I don't know it from the inside, but from what I understand, and I think it's a very interesting trend. But it is obviously I think at this stage a trend of protest rather than consensus, and therefore I'm sure he will have problems governing, but I wish him all the best, and I think it's a wonderful trend if it can continue, because the world needs that. But Argentina has a lot of debt and a lot of problems, and my fear is at this stage in our general economic cycle worldwide, that before we get proper governments and proper economic policies, my view is that the current system has to implode. There is no chance of building economies or prosperity on a real basis from these debt levels. And in my view, the global debt and debt in most countries has to implode. And, we can't just write off debt and think we write off all the debt and we're fine. It doesn't work like that. Well, if you write off the debt, all of the assets that were backed by this debt also implode. And therefore you get an implosion of the economy. And I think that's the only way we can have a sound system emerging from the ashes of this system. So sadly, although we have these initial movements in various countries, I think every country in the world will be dragged down by this debt collapse that the world has to go through at some point, whether that's today or in 10 years' time or whatever. I have no idea, and I'm not going to try to forecast. I know the risk is high that it can happen at any point, and I, as I said before, I think we are in the exponential stage of this the end of this monetary system. So it could happen very quickly. We could be talking about the last 5 minutes now, however long they are. But as not until then do I see, a sound system emerging out of that. And before that, of course, there will have to be a lot of suffering. So that's the picture I see. Not the brightest of pictures, but the world has always gone through this, and it's always survived. It's always moved on. I often take the example of the Eton, the school in England, which has been around for whatever it is now, so soon 600 years, I think. And it's okay. This is an elite school, of course, but nevertheless, it's been through wars, revolutions, depressions, inflation, etc., and it survived. Solid institutions survive, and the world is not going to end. It's just this era is going to come to an end, which every era always has. And this is why politicians never study history. They think it's different today because I can change it, but they can't.
So very true. Yeah.
Sadly, I think that's the evolution or the development of this end of this cycle that I see it happening. In the meantime, it's great to have these little bright lights in the way of Argentina, for example. And I wish them the best, but I doubt that will be able to withstand the pressure from the problems in the whole world.
Well, like always, Egon, we write out a dozen questions and we probably get through 2 or possibly 3. But I'm going to do one more question before Darryl finishes off. You mentioned Holland or the Netherlands, and I was reading an article very, very recently, probably only in the last week. It's an article from The Sovereign Man, and Simon Black writes about the Dutch Central Bank, and I quote, now, there's a couple of pieces here, so bear with me, but the music you hear will be very good. Confidence in the dollar is waning, and foreigners are starting to diversify to other assets. Data from the IMF, International Monetary Fund, showed that the US dollar's share of foreign exchange reserves had fallen to a multi-decade low. Similarly, foreigners' appetite to own US government bonds is dropping rapidly. A decade ago, foreigners happily owned 43% of all US government bonds. Today, foreigners' share is 30% and falling. These trends show very clearly that the dollar is simply not as dominant as it used to be. Now, I hope I expressed this gentleman's name correctly, but in a recent interview, gentleman's name is Aerd Hoben. A-E-R-D-T. So I pronounce it Aerd Hoben. A senior official at the Dutch Central Bank said the quiet part out loud and explained that the Netherlands was already preparing for a world in which gold, and not the US dollar, is the primary global reserve currency. Quote from the central banker, "The beauty of gold is that it's stable in value. It retains its value. That's one of the reasons why central banks hold gold. Gold is like solidified confidence for the central bank. If we ever unexpectedly have to create a new currency or a systemic risk arises, the public can have confidence in the Dutch Central Bank. Because whatever money we issue, we can back it with the same value in gold." Egon, is it only the Dutch that are preparing in this manner, or other countries in Europe that you know of?
Well, first of all, central bankers are politicians. That statement, yes, I have read it before. It's a bit of a political statement in my view, because he hasn't backed it by buying lots of gold for the country. No central bank in the West buys gold. So at least he speaks well about the gold, but back it up with action, then we will believe him. Not before that, I would say. So, but this confirms the point that I just said, that central banks will move their reserves from a dollar to gold. I mean, that is inevitable. They will do, and that's what he said. But let him back it up also. But remember, as we said, you talked about U.S. Treasuries. There is the problem is the U.S. is issuing more debt than ever, and we will need to even more so in coming years. And there is now no buyer of U.S. debt, especially long-term debt, except for the Fed itself. So the country is first issuing the debt, and then the central bank is buying the debt. That's the only way they can finance now survival. And therefore, of course, that's as we all understand, the recipe for disaster, because no foreigner, no central bank now wants to buy U.S. debt. And it comes back to the point, and I think maybe we haven't talked enough about gold here, because gold doesn't solve the world's problems, but for the ones of us who understand the risk now, at least we can recommend to people and to our clients, acquire physical gold, hold it outside the banking system in safe vaults, with your direct access to it, and hold it also in safest jurisdictions, gold-friendly jurisdictions. I mean, that's going to be critical for anyone who wants to survive the next collapse of bubble asset markets, and that is coming, guaranteed. Sadly, only 0.5%, as we know, world financial assets are in gold, and people are going to buy the dips when the stock market goes down, and most people will lose a lot of money and they won't then have enough money to buy gold. Oh, no, I'm going to wait for the stock market to recover, then I'll buy gold. And then when it recovers a bit, they're not going to buy gold, and then it drops again, and then they're not going to buy gold, and that it becomes a vicious circle. So, but there'll be enough buyers of gold in coming years, and I hopefully I really hope that people are going to heed this warning about the risk of the financial system and the banking system and the bubble asset markets, and actually own some real physical gold through you or through ourselves. We are probably the biggest for high net worth individuals outside the banking system. We're probably the biggest company in the world now for that. And I see I say to my colleagues, we've been in this for 25 years. I don't think we've started yet. We haven't seen the beginning of real gold buying yet. We're still at the 0.5% roughly of world financial assets. If that changes to 1 or 1.5%, the demand for gold be such that it can only, as we discussed before, be satisfied by much higher prices. And I think that's to come. But we're not buying gold for speculation or for higher price. We're buying gold for protection, for insurance. And that's what we recommend people to do also. Forget about the short-term timing, if it goes up or down today or tomorrow. Just buy it and sit on it and forget about the price also. Just hold it. That's I know it's not we're not doing it for ourselves. We're doing this, you are and we are, to help other people. That's the passion that we have. 100%. Certainly.
Yeah, fantastic answer. I would, before I hand it back to Darryl, I will just make one point here, and we all know none of us like paying taxes, but I read just 2 days ago that the total income tax of the United States, that the United States government collects, 40% of it goes in interest. 40% of the income tax the government collects goes in interest. Now, goes in interest? Who collects the interest? That's a story for another time. Thank you very much.
Look, you got to be kidding me. I mean,
Run out of time.
we're out of time. We've got 32 questions left. But once again, Egon, fantastic, as always. Look, we think if there was a gentleman, and we know Charlie Jones, of course, and we refer to Charlie Jones regularly, an American motivational speaker, but he always said, in 10 years' time, you'll be in exactly the same position you're in right now, apart from two things: the people you meet and the books you read. And people tonight, anyone who's been watching this particular interview has been provided with a wealth of information from one of the icons in the industry. I mean, what an opportunity. And my suggestion is that you follow Egon with a passion from this point. And if you do want to vault a considerable amount of gold, then you'd want to go to our Matterhorn Asset Management because they're the biggest in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just to take advantage of that. But take advantage of everything that Egon's spoken about tonight, because he makes so much sense, so much experience, so much knowledge about the industry and the way the world functions. So, and I have a look in the background, of course, and there's a library there, the books you read. So it's a pretty good combination, isn't it? Charlie Jones was right.
Absolutely. It's the books you read, the people you meet.
So I'd like to finish. Maybe you could do this, Brian. Remember,
I hope I get it right.
This is a wonderful story. It was a wonderful experience to see this happen. But Brian and I were at an event going back a few years ago, and Egon was the keynote speaker. You remember this?
I do remember.
And prior to Egon walking out on stage, there was another gentleman who was the CEO of the Perth Mint who was speaking.
Correct.
Can you remember what happened on that afternoon? Because I thought it was fabulous.
Well, I do have a pretty good recollection of it, and it goes like this. The Perth Mint CEO did his half-hour speech, and was in his speech, he talked about the amount of gold and silver that people should be buying. And what was astonishing me was that, he's the CEO of the Perth Mint, and his thoughts were 5 to 10%.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is what a lot of financial advisors recommended as well. I didn't think he was a financial advisor, but anyway, it's 5 to 10%. But he did say, but there are others that, you hear from time to time, they just come from another planet, and they might do 30 or 50%, but, they live on another planet. Anyway, so the CEO of the Perth Mint, he steps down from the stage,
And out comes the keynote.
and now, out comes the keynote speaker of the day, and it just happened to be Egon von Greyerz. And Egon started his speech basically by saying, "I'm Egon von Greyerz, but I come from another planet."
And I
Never forgotten it.
And there would have been 800, 900 people in the audience that day, and the applause was thunderous. The response was phenomenal.
Oh, it was fantastic. Music to my ears.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, he handed that to me. He was
No, look, thank you so much, Egon, once again. It's always a wonderful experience having a discussion with you. Really appreciate your input and your support for this channel. And other than that, I would love also to thank our viewers and subscribers for the support that they provide this channel. Thank you so much. And so until next time, let's all stay well. Let's all stay focused. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.